your child is probably not going to score good results for IGCSEs. Part of you also think that this might be the first time they actually fail a very big exam. And on top of this, IGCSE exams are coming soon and you're more stressed than ever. You are probably sending your child to a very expensive private slash international school, and your child has probably been performing poorly in school. And because of this, their teachers have kind of chucked them aside and, not kind of focus on them. Well, think about it. If a class consists of 20 to 30 students, how do you expect the school to give your child personalized attention? I mean, from a reputation and business standpoint, they'd rather focus on students who are doing well. Because at the end of the day, those students are the ones who are going to leave a good name on the school. If this is currently happening, it's not your fault. It's also not the fault of your child. If your child is performing poorly in exams, in school, assessments, whatever, it does not mean they're dumb. It just means that they had a poor foundation to start with, right? I mean, a house built on sand just cannot withstand the storm. At the end of the day, you just want your child to take responsibility of their education and, just finally move on to the next stage of their life. I want to share a very similar story with you, the story of a parent who had already gone through all the struggles that you as a parent are currently going through right now, and his son recently went from a D to an A star in IGCSE in just a span of 6 weeks. I promise you that by the end of this video, you will know exactly how to take your child from wherever they are right now, doesn't matter if it's a C or D or below, to an A star in a very short amount of time. If you apply the things that I'm going to say in this video, I promise you that you will see tremendous results for your child and you will see improvement in as soon as 2 weeks. As a parent, you will finally feel relieved and you will know that your child is on the right path to success. This is David. David wanted to get his son help for economics. His son was doing well until year 10 and his son performed poorly in the previous term assessment. Now, his son, if left alone, David admitted that his son would be on track to score C's and D's in economics if left completely alone with the school. And he has tried countless tuition programs for his son, local tuition, home tutoring, sending his son to the center and things like that. Like, he has just tried multiple things. He also stated that he has been sending his son to a very prestigious private slash international school since his son was in year 2. And guess what? This school that he has been sending his son to told him that his son will not be able to do A levels, which is the next big thing after IGCSEs. His son will not be able to do A levels if his son doesn't improve in economics before the real IGCSE. So basically, the school was saying if your child just continues to score C's and D's up until IGCSE and actually gets that as his real IGCSE result, his son won't be able to do A levels under the school name. Now, just imagine, right? How would that feel? As a parent, you've been paying shitloads of money to this international slash private school that you've been sending your child to, your son or daughter, for a very long time, and they suddenly tell you, look, I don't think your child can do A levels under our name if your child does bad. It's like they just chuck your child to the side and they're just focusing on the ones who are currently performing, right? Well, how is that fair? This happens in a lot of private schools. I speak to so many parents and most of them say the same thing. The school isn't always giving personalized attention to my child just because my child performed poorly recently or ever since IGCSE started. And, ever since his performance has gone down, the school has kind of, secluded him to the side and just the school just focused on kids who are doing well. This is a very common thing. Do not feel alone. So, in this initial meeting that I had with David, this was around April, I think the second week of April, I listened to all his problems and ultimately I found out there were 3 main problems with his son. Firstly, his son didn't know how to study. Now I don't blame his son for this at all. No schools I know of ever teach their kids how to study. It's always teaching them the main content, right? The main chapters, but the school doesn't really tell you how do you actually take in all these chapters that I currently threw at your face and remember everything, right? No schools do this at all. Why? Because it would just be a waste of time. So, and teachers have quotas to hit, and teachers have, higher ups to respond to. So they just don't really show kids how do you actually remember information, how do you retain information for a very long time until exams, right? This is not taught at all in schools. And his son didn't know how to take exams as well. Another thing which is overshadowed by schools, they do not teach exam technique, right? Yes, they make you, they teach content so that you can prepare for exams, but they don't actually teach you how, the how-to behind taking exams. They don't teach you the strategies, right? Because taking exams is not an easy thing. IGCSEs is probably the first real big academic assessment your child will face, right? Any kid between 15 to 16-year-old will feel very nervous when it comes to IGCSEs, right? It's normal, and schools just don't really touch on this thing, right? So his son had that problem. And his son generally had no confidence when it came to academics, just because, his son has been performing poorly in previous assessments. And, ever since IGCSE started, like year 10 onwards, his son just didn't have the confidence. Now, these three problems that I stated here isn't just relevant to David's son. 90% of students whose parents send them to very prestigious, expensive private schools say the same thing, right? I always find out these three things when it comes to, parents who send their kids to good schools. Their child doesn't know how to study, doesn't know how to take exams, and just isn't confident in general when it comes to academics. So if your child is anything like David's child, and if you are facing the same problems, David, I'm going to give you the solution on how you can turn this around 180 degrees. Now, here's the worst part. I don't think I mentioned this, but his son was actually 6 weeks away from his actual exam. Not 6 months, not 8 months, not a year, 6 weeks. And his son was at like a very bad extending point in academics, and his son only had 6 weeks to turn it around. That would have been mission impossible, right? It's almost impossible. So first things first, if you find your child in a very similar situation like this, you need to first fix their foundation. How do you do this? You do an assessment, right? So I gave David's son an in-house assessment that we had our team prepare. Now, you can take any assessment from online or request an assessment from the school. There's so many resources out there, and you just need to make your child sit for an assessment, right? Just so you can get that number, like where do they currently stand in academics. So for David's son, we were handling economics. So we wanted to see like where was his son actually standing. So we got a number. It was 49 out of 80. So that is about, if my math is right, that's about 61%, 60%, right? So like borderline C, basically a D, right? So like very borderline C to a D. So once we found out that his child has scored 49 out of 80 and only had 6 weeks to turn it around, we had no time to spare. So what I did, I created a customized roadmap just for his son so I could get a bird's eye view. So I created everything from week 1 to week 6 on how I'm actually going to bring his son from D to an A star. That was my goal. I want to turn his son into like a superstar in school, basically. So in week 1, it was the diagnostic and foundation phase. Week 2, we would strengthen weak areas. Week 3, building essay and evaluation skills. Now, this is subject dependent. Just because his son was taking economics, we had to focus on building essay and evaluation skills. It depends for the subject. And in week 4, past year injection campaign, this is where we make the student do a lot of past year questions. What are past year questions? So past year questions are basically previous years of IGCSEs that are available online to do as practice, right? There are tons of resources out there for free and paid. So, we made his son do a lot of past year questions. And in week 5, we would do a mock exam and analysis. So what this means is basically we would simulate what the real IGCSEs felt like. So we gave his son a lot of test papers and, made it like an exam condition. So since his son was in our mentorship program, we made him switch on the camera, at multiple angles, pointed towards his like desk, had the paper printed out, only had stationaries, calculator, and no phones, no gadgets and things like that. So a real exam simulation at home. We made his son do that, and then we would see, is he actually scoring a minimum of 90%? If he's not, well, back to past year injection. Just do more past years. If he is, if his son is scoring more than 90%, well, great. We will do a final review of all the exam strategies and just work on the mental side of things, because exam is a big thing at the end of the day. So we made sure that his son felt very composed and calm before taking exams. Now, this might seem confusing to you, just because maybe your child isn't in our mentoring program. So I will just break this down on how you can apply it for your child. So, secondly, you need to start with weaker topics. So, firstly, you need to fix foundations, right? Do an assessment and get where they stand. And after that, your child needs to start with weaker topics. Please emphasize this to them, right? There's a very common doing among students. They like to work on topics they are good at. Think about it. What's the point? Right? Why do you want to work on something that you're already very good at? Even as a parent, right? If you're very good at something, why would you keep doing it? You want to keep doing things where you're not good at. Why? Because you want to get better at the things you're not good at. So again, this is a very relatable quote for the situation. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Just fix things that you're bad at, right? So start by focusing on weaker topics. Now, how do you do this? There are many ways to fix weaker topics, but since his son was 6 weeks away from the actual exam, we didn't have time to test different techniques, right? So the fastest way for your child to improve in IGCSEs, this is a little hack. Your child can see improvement in as soon as 2 weeks. Your child can actually jump 1-2 grades in the span of 2 weeks if your child implements what I'm about to say right now. So your child needs to fix weaker topics by implementing these two techniques, which I call active recall and spaced repetition. Let's take a look at this graph. This graph is called the curve of forgetting for newly learned information, and it's by Hermann Ebbinghaus, who was a scientist in the 1850s, and this study was published around 1885. So this curve looks very complex and difficult to understand, but let me break it down for you. Now, I want you to take a look at a whiteboard that I'm about to draw. Okay, say this is a whiteboard, and let's say you learned something new. It doesn't matter if it's Now I want you to take a look at a whiteboard that I'm about to draw. So let's say this is a whiteboard, and let's say you just learned a new concept. Let's say you learned that a squared plus b squared equals to c squared, for example, right? You learned this on day 0. And let's say you do not revisit this information at all. You learn something on day 0 and you just let it be. And then it's day 1, day 2, day 3, and day 4. By the time it's day 4, what you wrote on day 0 on the whiteboard with a marker, what do you think will happen by the time it gets to day 4? Well, the writing kind of fades away, right? The writing fades away, and what you learned on day 0, you will not remember on day 4. That is exactly what this blue line represents, right? You learn something on day 0, memory stays at 80%, and by the time it's day 4, you slowly forget things, right? Just like this whiteboard over here, there is nothing. The marker fades away, right? You just forgot what you learned. But let's try another technique out. Let's say you learn something on day 0, right? Let's use the same example of a squared plus b squared equals to c squared. Let's say you learned this on day 0. Now, instead of waiting 4 days, let's say it gets to day 1 and you revisit what you learned, right? You revisit what you learned. It's like kind of writing what you learned over what you previously learned on day 0. So you write it over. A squared plus b squared equals to c squared. Now, instead of waiting until day 4, at day 3, you revisit what you learned. A squared plus b squared equals to c squared. And instead of waiting until day 6, on day 4, you revisit what you learned. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. What do you think happens to this information? It will permanently stick in your head. Just like how when you take a marker and you keep writing over it, that marker now becomes permanent marker. This information that you just learned now gets permanently stored in your brain. Even if you try to forget it, you just can't. Well, that's what this pink line represents. At first repetition, yes, you do forget, but not as much as the first time you learned that information. Second repetition, yes, you do forget, but at a much slower rate. Third repetition, you forget it, but again, much slower rate. And by the time it's fourth repetition, that memory stays above 80%. Yes, it will fall, but guess what happens when you repeat it for the 5th time? that memory shoots up to 100% and falls even slower. This is the trick of how students remember information for years and how you can get your child to remember whatever they are learning currently right now for biochem, physics, economics, whatever it is, for years to come, right? And guess what's the best part? IGCSE is just a few months away, not years away. So they'll probably remember 99% of what they learned if they follow this technique. Now, how do you implement this for your child? We can't be taking whiteboards and writing, information that we learn over and over it again. We don't have that many whiteboards, and it's just going to be a waste of ink. Well, we do this using flashcards, right? You write the question in front and the answers at the back, and every time your child wants to go and review what they learned, they just turn it and see the answers, right? So we built a library of flashcards for David's son for economics. So we built every question, and all his son had to do was just revisit that, use his flashcard software every morning before he comes to class so that he actually remembers what he learned from the previous lesson, from 2 days ago, from 3 days ago, and things like that. Now, this technique is called active recall and spaced repetition. Why active recall? Because you're actively trying to recall information. You do that by flashcards, not a whiteboard. And spaced repetition because you're spacing out the time the days between you revisit that information. Now, I will drop a link to this flashcard software. It's completely free. I will drop a link of this software in the description below so that you can use it for your child for free of charge. Now, I'm going to show you what implementing this technique, active recall and spaced repetition, did for David's son. Now, around 2 weeks later, from the first week, from week 0 that his son joined the mentorship program. Around 2 weeks later, I had a progress call with him. Right? We have 2 weeks bi-weekly progress calls with parents for our mentorship program. So 2 weeks later, I kind of updated David how his son is currently doing, and I want you guys to see this, right? This also brings us to our third step. Your child should track every data. Let me show you what tracking data does. This is all the chapters. This is the first 3 chapters in economics. For context, economics has 6 chapters. So by the time it's the second week, his son had already done the first 3 chapters. Now, chapter 1, his son was at about a 51.4% mastery. Now, how did I get this information? From the previous assessment that we did for his son. So we kind of weighed in all the questions from chapter 1 and got a number. And chapter 2, his son was at 42.7%, and chapter 3, his son was at 50%. Now, just after 2 weeks, right? Just after 2 weeks and implementing these 2 techniques and using flashcards, his son jumped from 51.4 to a 62%, 42.7 to a 65%, 50% to a 72.6%. Yes, this might not seem like very big numbers, but overall, guess what it did for his son's improvement? His son improved by 38.9% in the span of 2 weeks. Now, if you count it to the bigger picture, that's basically a D to a B in the span of 2 weeks. Yes, parents, this is the power of using active recall and spaced repetition. This is the power of using flashcards, because when you use flashcards, you hurt your brain. Anything that hurts your brain is good. Now, contrary to popular belief, if you actually hurt your brain and try to remember something, and when you finally look at the answer, you will now never forget that information. And I also would recommend your child to track data like how I track. So how do you track data? Very simple. You don't need graphs like this. This was, we did this because his son was in our mentorship program. Now, if your child isn't, well, you can track data like this. Ask your child to set aside, put a paper, like take a paper and write down the mistakes they made from the previous, worksheet that they did or previous lesson that they attended. Like what mistakes, like what did they keep getting wrong? Write it all in one paper, right? So when they do another, worksheet or attend another lesson, they can look at the paper and know not to repeat their mistakes, right? Because what's the point of repeating mistakes, right? It will just slow down progress. So by knowing what not to repeat, your child can save weeks on end just by knowing what to avoid. So I would highly recommend your kids to track data. So just let them know that tracking data is very, very important. Now, fourthly, I would recommend your child to do a minimum of 3 years worth of past papers, right? Past papers are available online. You can just go and get them and get your child to do a minimum of 3 years. That is exactly what we did for David's son. We had his son do a minimum of 3 years worth of past questions for economics. It was like we were just throwing questions at his son, like question after question after question, worksheets after worksheet after worksheets, past years after past years. We just want to get his son super familiar with that IGCSE concept. So when it came to exam, his son didn't have to get scared at all. right? So past year injection campaign is very important, right? Get your child to do a minimum of 3 years worth of past year questions, right? Now, last but not least, this is probably the most important thing, exam simulation cycle. So what this was around week 5 to 6 for David's son's mentorship program. So what this basically means for you parents is basically you got to set exam conditions at home, right? You got to pretend like your house or wherever your son is studying, doesn't matter if it's the living room, study room, the library, whatever it is, right? You got to make sure that it's under exam conditions. Now, how do you do that? Let me give you some tips. You got to make sure that the environment is around 18 to 20 degrees. Now, this is important. Why? Because the exam hall is going to be so cold. I've sat for exams before. I have friends who sat for exams before, and I know all my students sit for exams before. So they all tell me that the room is so cold, super cold. So you need to set the environment like that so your child will actually get familiar with that, temperature. Only allow basic stationery, pen, ruler, eraser, nothing much, nothing fancy, and a calculator if needed. If your child is doing maths, well, allow calculator. If your child is doing a math paper that doesn't require calculator, well, prohibit calculator, right? Water bottle, no electronics, and you just have to supervise them, right? For David's son, we supervised him, our team supervised him, but you can just supervise your child during exam simulation cycle. So, we did exam simulation for David's son, and his son slowly started getting an A, right? You notice his son went from a B to an A around week 6. This was around week 5 to week 6, right? He kept scoring A in his papers, although not a very strong A, but still, it's still massive improvement from D. If his son first started from D, now his son is scoring an A. His son scored A in MCQs. And, we just gave him around, I think we did around 5 simulations of exam. And now, that's not the best part yet. You might be wondering, you clicked on this video because you thought that a child went from D to A stars, right? Well, this is just a D to A. Where's the A star? 24 hours before the exam, we had his son do a final assessment, right? This was like the final predictor. What his son was about to score in this paper is probably like 95% chance of what he's going to score in actual IGCSEs. Now, we had his son sit for an essay paper just because the next day his son was going to sit for, an essay IGCSE econs paper. And we also held exam simulation for him, right? We monitored him and we put him under exam conditions at home. And, we just monitored him through the camera. And guess what he ended up scoring? This boy ended up scoring an A star. He went from a D, right? A D to an A star in 56 days. You can see the entire chart over here of his son's progression. His son started at a very low 49 out of 80 all the way to an A star in the span of 6 weeks, right? David was super happy, he was just super happy. And we even asked his son, like, what do you think? How did you find the exam today? And his son was like, yeah, I found it super good, 9.365 out of 10. His son doesn't really give very high numbers, but, it felt really nice, that his son gave this number for the first time, such a high number. I was confident, and his dad was super happy. And just imagine your child saying that, Dad, I scored, I felt like the paper was super good. I feel a 9 out of 10. You're going to feel very good just because your child hasn't been confident in, IGCSEs at all. And all of a sudden after exam, the child's like, Dad, I feel super confident now. I feel a 9 out of 10. I feel a 10 out of 10, right? You will feel good as a parent. And, that is, what we basically strive for in this mentorship. So, David was super happy. And I even, personally had an interview with David just to hear his thoughts. And, everything went well. So how do you take whatever I've said today and go and implement it for your child so that you can see your child score A stars? Very simple. I'll break it into simple steps for you. Step number 1, find out where they stand. Do an assessment, right? Request it from the school. Take it online. It doesn't matter. If you need help getting an assessment for your child, just comment in this comment down this YouTube video or just send me a DM on Instagram. I will help you out in any way possible. Secondly, please tell your child to not fix what's not broken. Like, don't fix what's not broken, right? Your child needs to start with weak topics first. It will feel very good and rewarding, to the brain when you do things you're good at. But what doesn't hurt your brain? If it doesn't hurt your brain, it means you're not learning, right? So your child needs to learn. In order to do that, they need to start with weaker topics. And then they need to implement flashcards ASAP, right? Use the software that I'm about to link in the description and get your child on it as soon as possible. And your child needs to start tracking every mistake they make. They can use a spreadsheet on Microsoft, Google, or they can just use a manual paper. It doesn't matter. There are so many other metrics and data to be tracked, but your child can just start off by tracking mistakes. Now, fifth, get your child to do a minimum of 3 years worth of past year questions, right? There is this is non-negotiable almost. Like, do a minimum of 3 years if you want your child to score an A star, right? Well, I think keep it between 3 to 5, right? Above 5 is a bit not necessary. I mean, it's too much. Well, too much is always good, but sometimes the syllabus gets outdated, and well, there's no point doing outdated syllabus, right? So just stick to 3 years and your child will be fine. And please make sure your child does an exam simulation at home. So set exam conditions for your child and make sure, they are treating it like a real exam. And I promise you, I've seen this so many times in my mentorship program and outside of my mentorship programs. I've seen this happen so many times, right? If a child follows all these steps, they will get an A star regardless of whatever subject. If David's son could do it in 6 weeks, your child can do it in 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 1 year, 6 months. It doesn't matter. Just follow this framework, and I promise you, your child will see success and you will feel very fulfilled as a parent. Now, if you want our help to implement the same techniques we used to get David's son from a D to A star, well, just book a call with us in the link in the description. Just pick your time and we can talk. We'll see whether we can help your child get to where they want to be in IGCSE. Besides that, I hope you found this video useful, and I hope your child starts implementing at least 1 to 2 of these techniques I talked about today. I'll see you in the next one.